Hello all, Rick here with a video looking into the history of Dax. Not Jadzia, Ezri or any other of them specifically, but the Symbiont itself. The life of Dax is a long and complicated one, which is mostly covered in supplementary stories, some of which conflict where dates are concerned. So this video aims to create a cohesive look at Dax's timeline. That being said, bear in mind that some of these dates are going to be approximations, or you may have heard a tale with an alternate account. So let's get started at the beginning. The Symbiont Dax was born in 2018 on Trill, as a little tadpole to one of the millennia-old Anuated that reside on the bottom of the pools of Makala. These are the end-stage life cycle of the symbionts, and they're around 30 meters long, have hive minds for the symbionts to release their accumulated memories too. It would take around 50 to 100 years before Dax was mature enough to be joined itself, and until this time it would have been cared for by the Order of Guardians and its fellow symbionts. So this first date is the biggest point of confusion, as in passing it's mentioned as 2168 being the first joining, but this date is at odds with every other tale told around the early Dax's life. A date around the 21st century makes more sense for the rest of the timeline, as you'll see, but I need to point this one out here. So, around the end of the 21st century, Dax underwent its first joining to one Lela Dax, and their first role was to join the Trill Symbiosis Commission as a field docent for Trill initiates, and would continue to be heavily involved in the commission for some time, and revisited the role in later lives, completing this training in 2 years. However, Lela Dax rose to prominence when she made her way into politics, the fourth woman to take a leading role in the ruling council. She had detractors and opponents, one of which was the early hosts of Odan, another joined Trill. In this time, Trill was aware of the greater galactic community but had opted to remain apart from it and develop themselves. This wish was commonly communicated to approaching vessels via subspace radio, which the Trill had developed before the warp drive. One vessel, however, ignored their hails, and Dax contacted them directly against convention, earning her accusations of treason. She was acquitted, but it marks the beginning of a trend that seems common in Dax of ignoring convention. Lela went on to teach on Adnevian 2 after Trill began to expand outwards and explore, and had several children in her life, including her daughter Milaine and son Arches with her husband Narea. Lela Dax went on to pass on of old age after living a full and occasionally controversial life, and Dax itself was removed and returned to the pools of Makala, as no host had been selected as a replacement yet. According to some, Lela had a habit of walking with her hands clasped behind her back and pacing, something that Jadzia would later subconsciously adopt. Eventually, Tobin Dax was selected to be the second Dax host, and at this time Trill had made contact with other cultures including Starfleet. He had already made a bit of a name for himself as an engineer with expertise in sublight engines, and was contacted by the Cochrane Institute of Alpha Centauri to help develop their transporter and impulse engines. In 2154, he observed the launch of the NX-02 Columbia, and was part of the engineering team that prepared the warp systems for launch. The exact nature of the Symbiont Trill joining was maintained as a secret from others. During the Earth-Romulan War of 2155, he lent his expertise to Earth's attempts to create a Warp 7 engine, and continued to work alongside the engineering teams of Sol until the close of the war and beyond. After the formation of the United Federation of Planets, the USS Pioneer was undergoing a warp core overhaul with an engine that could achieve 5.6, and Tobin was part of the installation team, remaining on board and eventually being commissioned as the chief engineer. In 2165, however, he decided to leave the Pioneer as it was too dangerous for him, and he chose to visit his friends on Vulcan. While there, he met Phlox, who was visiting the planet too, and took a keen interest in the Vulcan Reformation. His friends went on to start their own family, and with their first child, Sarek, which made Tobin realise he wanted a family of his own. Eventually this would occur, and he had one child, Raifi. as he approached death, Dax was reassigned to Emony Dax, a young and aspiring gymnast. She eventually went on to win the 22-24 Olympics at Aldebaran, and she won 3 medals. Eventually she took on the role of judge for other events and had a dalliance with a young Leonard McCoy. By 2257 she had retired from gymnastics and met Lieutenant James Kirk on the USS Farragut. She eventually became wrapped up in a Starfleet investigation and even Section 31 briefly when she posed as a Starfleet officer. It was not long after this that Dax was passed on to its 4th host. In 2224, Audrid was born, and over her life she remained very involved with the Trill Symbiosis Commission. It seems she was already married to Javin Vod, another joined Trill, and after her joining, she operated primarily in the Trill system, eventually reaching the head position of the Symbiosis Commission. In 2265, she joined Fleet Captain Pike to investigate a comet entering the system with life signs on it. These life signs proved to be hostile to symbionts in particular, and it resulted in the death of Vod. In keeping with the orders to remain hush on the existence of the symbionts, the entire affair was classified. She had 2 children, Nima and Grun, whom she had a falling out with concerning the cover-up of this event. Her daughter Nima was also joined to a symbiont, Syl. At the age of 56 in 2280 she retired from the position of head of the Symbiosis Commission, but she would pass 4 years later when Dax was transferred to its 5th host, Torias. In his past, he had journeyed to Beta Z and had a promising career as a pilot. However, this host would not last very long, as he died later that year-ish. Torias' first act was to marry Nilani Khan, whom he had passed through the Initiates training with, in 2284 and 5. He worked alongside the Daystrom Institute on various transwarp projects, but later that year he died piloting a test shuttle and was rushed to surgery to save Dax. Unfortunately, this is the time when Dax was joined to Joran Bellar. Joran was a prominent graduate of the Tenarian Music Academy and proficient in numerous instruments from several worlds, including Earth and Vulcan. He had made it through the joining vetting process despite his volatile temper and cold demeanour. After the joining, however, his personality shifted further and he became a serial killer, taking out at least 3 others. As he attempted a 4th murder, he himself was killed instead in the presence of an investigator from the Commission. As scathing as his short life as Dax was, it was his death that had lasting repercussions. In order to cover up the fact that such an individual made it all the way to the joining, the Commission covered it up. Joran's records were altered to suggest he was dropped from the selection, and Dax itself had a memory block created around the Joran personality, hiding it from even its own mind. Instead, the 6 months Dax spent in Joran were replaced with the tale that Torias had remained battling a coma after his accident, and then Dax was transferred to Curzon. Not only was this cover-up a crime itself, but the tampering of the symbiont's memories was, in many ways, more harmful than allowing it and the hosts to come to terms with Joran's actions. Curzon Antrani was joined in 2285, in his mid-20s, and was an up-and-coming diplomat trained by Sarek. He was personal friends with the Federation president and represented them to the Klingon Empire as an ambassador. He showcased a good understanding of Klingon negotiations by flagrantly disregarding Federation custom and decorum and actively insulting Kang. This made the Klingons laugh, who were then open to further discussion despite drawing blades. All this earned him the mistrust of Captain Sulu, however, but Curzon continued to gain notoriety and fame among the Klingons. Basically, he respected and participated in their customs to an excessive extent, meeting with Kor, Gorkon, Koloth, Navok, and even swearing a blood oath to capture and eliminate the albino. The Federation eventually learned to respect his actions too, as he managed to sway even Klingons to yield tactical information to the Federation which spared lives and prevented further bloodshed in this tense period of Klingon-UFP relations. When the moon of Praxis exploded, Curzon, Sarek, Spock, and Gorkon all worked to forge the Khitomer Accords. All of this was accomplished while the man was still in his 30s. In 2328, Dax was asked to be the neutral negotiator in talks between the Klingons and Cardassians, which turned into a long ordeal exacerbated by scheming from both sides and even Romulan involvement. In 2339 he was sent to sort out a civil war and Clastron, where he ended up sleeping with the General's wife. During the 2340s, relations between the Federation and the Klingons were decreasing once more, but then the Narendra 3 incident happened, and the Enterprise C was destroyed protecting the Klingon settlement of Narendra. It was around 2355 that Curzon met Benjamin Sisko for the first time, when he was assigned as an attaché to him at Pelios Station, and would begin to mentor the young cadet. In 2367, Curzon was on holiday on Risa when the strain of Jamaharon caused him to collapse. He was hospitalised, and Jadzia Dax was eventually selected as Dax's next host. She initially had been denied by Curzon Dax, who had claimed to have done this to reaffirm her purpose, which ultimately worked. Her personality after joining incorporated many aspects of her past hosts, most prominently those memories of Curzon. Alongside working to achieve a joining, Jadzia was also training as a scientist at Starfleet Academy, where she graduated in the 98th percentile a year after being joined with Dax, which had been in 2367. She was 26 when she was joined. A year later, she was promoted to lieutenant and transferred to Deep Space Nine as its chief science officer, and was reunited with Benjamin Sisko, now a commander. Her entire life from this point is shown on screen, but her specialties were astrophysics, exoarchaeology, exobiology, and zoology. In 2370, Verad forced a joining between himself and Dax to prove that any Trill could act as a host, and that the joining commission was just a system of control. I mean, he is kind of correct, but the commission's original purpose was to protect and ensure the symbionts had enriching lives by weeding out those deemed unworthy. This was a short-term joining, and Dax was returned to Jadzia. In 2371 she was promoted to Lieutenant Commander. Several times she chose to ignore the rules of the Symbiosis Commission and adhere to the debts of her former host Curzon, alongside committing to reignite a relationship with the Khan Symbiont from her time as Torias. She married Lieutenant Commander Worf. Eventually, however, tragedy would strike in the form of the Pile Wraiths when Gul Dukat entered the temple on DS9 and killed her as she observed his attack on the Celestial Temple. Jadzia passed away and Dax was critically injured, but saved. It was sent back to Trill for care and rejoining, but complications arose mid-transport, and Ezri Tegan was the only Trill on board the transporting USS Destiny, and she ended up being joined to Dax to keep it alive. This was unorthodox in that she had never considered joining and was completely untrained and unprepared for Dax. After joining, she was to meet with the Symbiosis Commission to evaluate and counsel her, and her own personality was shifting. Feeling lost among her friends and family, she took a leave of absence and travelled to Earth to meet with her former closest friend over 2 lives, Sisko. Ezri was a counsellor in profession and would primarily continue in this role. However, she began to learn from Dax's history and develop new, old, skills such as wider scientific knowledge. However, she had a great trouble separating the habits and moods of Dax's prior hosts as she had no official training. In 2375, she pursued a romantic relationship with Julian Bashir in the final days of the Dominion War, and after the Federation's victory, she chose to remain on Deep Space Nine. This is where the canon ends with Ezri, and external media has a variety of futures for her, from marrying Bashir to separating, and even her switching to the Command Division and rising to the rank of captain based on her accumulated experience as she came to terms with being Dax. Dax has seemingly been a bit of a rebellious symbiont, and a problem for the Symbiosis Commission, even when he was working for them. While it could be easy to point at the boisterous Curzon for influencing Jadzia Dax's personality, with his eccentric lifestyle and myriad of hobbies, there are older violations of Trill doctrine regarding Dax, beginning all the way back in the 21st century with her first host, Lela. Lela herself took actions based on what was necessary rather than what was tradition or expected, and this trend only continued on in later hosts. With this, there were the problematic hosts of Joran and Verad, one of which was an unhinged killer and the other forced the joining on Dax. This left lasting scars on the psyche of Dax, and by the time of Ezri, it's no surprise that she struggled with managing Dax's numerous experiences and voices. While it's difficult to say what a symbiont was like themselves, I would say that Dax seems to be a little brash, confident, and boisterous, regardless of who they are within, as this seems to be the only consistent qualities. Although Tobin was noted as being far more nervous, it should also be noted that he went on and worked for Starfleet at a time before the Federation even existed, and when Trill was still very mistrustful of outsiders, again bucking the trend of his people in favour of exploring new possibilities. If anything, I'd say that makes Tobin one of the braver souls to inhabit Dax, considering he was surrounded by non-Trill in a time of war and remained there despite his nerves. We have seen some potential versions of Dax, but nothing confirmed as of writing this. But barring the death of the symbiont itself, such a life form can live for around 600 years before being unable to be joined anymore and returning to the pools. From here they age up to at least 5,000 years and continue to grow, tending to the young and the annuated, the eldest of their kind. Not all go on to become annuated, the 20,000-year-old giants at the deepest reaches of the pools, but I would love to bet that the main character plot armor would permit Dax to become one of these titanic hive minds of the Trill, responsible for keeping the collective memories of all the hosts, and even others alive for generations to come. Thanks for watching this video on the life and times of Dax, and I hope to see you back for a future video, or if you just want to see more on the Trill themselves, I have covered them in a separate video a while back. Until then, thanks again, and goodbye.